got a lot to cover here. First, let's start off with that big, beautiful tax and spending package the House GOP is struggling to push through. So they were finally able to pass it through the House Budget Committee for to the floor as of the timing of this conversation. But where does this really go next? One, the GOP really can't rally its troops the way we think it can. And two, you know what? The president doesn't really have that good of a track record of passing stuff through his Congress. I'll start with you, Justin.
Yeah, this takes a lot of negotiation and work, and it has been a long road. This bill, it's highly complex, and there are problems with it. And most notably, the problems are it's expensive. There are good things with it, I feel, but it is expensive, and there are cuts that conservatives are looking for that have not been communicated adequately. I think communication is one of the, we've talked about this over and over again, how the different parties do a poor job of communications in general, and this is really no different. But I think the onus of communications lies upon the executive branch in this particular case, and there is no communications. When folks are talking about cutting, Medicaid or reforming Medicaid, there is no universal tone. There's no universal language. There is no, mentioning about, this is about getting for example, able-bodied people to work and improve their lives. We hear a lot about cuts, and the challenge is that to pay for these things, Republicans are proposing cutting programs that are extraordinarily popular, and there's about 15% support for making cuts to them and with the American public. So there's stinkers in terms of the political outlook. But in the past, by Democrats and Republicans, various forms of reforming those programs so that they apply to those who most need them and don't apply to those who need them less, have been successful, largely through effective communication. We're not seeing it here. Whether it's going to pass or not, whether it's going to move forward or not, that's way beyond my limit of competence. But it's moved this far. So I think it's, even though it's taking a long, long time, it seems somewhat inexorable.
Stefan, I had to ask Justin first because that's his side, right?
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to see, okay, what's happening with his boys there in Congress, but so Justin here saying that they have problems communicating exactly what's in this bill. Folks are saying also that House Republicans are trying to, sort of sneak this bill into passage, at least passing it out of their chamber in the middle of the night. So people won't even notice that it's happening. What are your thoughts?
I mean, there definitely have been bills where that something gets thrown in right at the last minute. I don't think this is really in that category where they've been talking about this for a while. There are all the fights just because they happen to have that committee vote. I think it was late last night, right? This doesn't in the middle of the night sniff test, at least for me. And I think what is telling is that the conservatives who voted present to get it through the committee aren't on yes, and this is just a totally internal Republican fight, right? So from a pure political standpoint, not talking about effects on people, effects on programs, anything like that, right? This is, or at least in theory, should be a win-win for Democrats, where it's like, look, they pass it, there are 5 million things to run against and terrible things that are likely going to be in this bill, or arguments you can make about how this is affecting local communities. And I think the last numbers I saw, the most people are going to see about I think it's maybe like $900 in their pocket at the end of the year or something like that, which, hey, most of us will take $900, but it's not, this is not life-changing money for anyone. And then if they don't pass it, then they're incompetent fools who can't even, get anything passed when Republicans are in charge of everything. So I think Democrats, I don't get to say this too often, are handling this pretty well so far, of the kind of pointing out some of the things that are particularly egregious, not really saying all too much. This is on you guys. Try to see if you can actually get this thing passed. So, I mean, we'll find a way to screw it up. But so far, I mean, I agree with Justin. I I'm not giving high marks to any kind of messaging, but I think, part of that is just they don't really know what they're going to have to put together to actually get to the whatever it's going to be, 217, 218, and keep the moderates and the far right happy. So it's a little tough to message around something that's not final.
Mhm. Hey, just a little follow-up, Justin. So at least what's being reported, the Social Security dimensions or aspects of this bill have it theoretically having people getting something like a $4,000 tax break as a result of like the new Social Security. Because there was, there've been a lot of concerns that the administration was messing around with or tinkering with Social Security too much. So that's a good thing, right? People, seniors getting $4,000 extra in their Social Security. Based on what I'm seeing. But of course, there are some issues with Medicaid. $880 billion cut to Medicaid last reported, and that's affecting 13 million Americans plus. So not such a bad thing, right? I mean, as far as Republicans offering a $4,000 per person, a $4,000 tax break of sorts.
Whatever money's come back to Americans are going to be popular, right? And removing some of the burdens on Social Security for our elderly are clearly popular. I mean, the fact that as a nation we tax benefits that we forcibly remove from our population over the course of their working lives, and then we give them back and we tax them. It seems profoundly unfair, right? I mean, it's there are a myriad of different arguments you can make about whether someone is financially well off enough to pay that and scaling and these sorts of things. I think those are good conversations to have, but at the end of the day, any way that whatever the Republicans are doing will ease the burden of costs of living, that was the core mandate that they were elected upon this past November, is going to be popular with them. To the degree that they introduce pain across a significant enough group of Americans, well, that's going to have a direct and powerful effect at the ballot box. But there's real opportunity there, and there are some terrific things in the bill. I mean, some things that should stimulate growth, that should stimulate income, should certainly stimulate the vast size of small to medium businesses that populate the United States, that generate the a tremendous amount of wealth and just getting by money. But they do still have to kind of focus on the hard business of how do they deal with that, the costs, which are now starting to become bigger and bigger. I mean, we just lost our last AAA credit rating this past week, and there's a reason for that. And there's only one reason for that. We spend too much money and our debt is too high. And this will have a direct effect on costs of living, because ultimately, if that's allowed to get out of control, governments only have one meaningful widget, and that is to add more taxes. And that will burden Americans, and whoever has to do it is going to pay for it at the ballot box.
Hey, Stefan, to Justin's point, do you think Republicans talk too much about or turn too much to the national debt argument when we're trying to resolve these different issues, when we're also trying to pass these tax and spending bills, especially when Republicans are in control of Congress?
Right. I mean, I think what it ultimately does.
I guess the big question here is it really that I'm posing? Well, of course, Justin, I see where you're coming from. Is it really that big of a deal as Republicans make?
I mean, I think that's sort of two questions there, right? So I think, yes, deficits and the debt are a big deal, but then, so that's like one piece, right? I think it's tough to argue that it's not a big deal, but the way that they talk about it, they paint themselves into a corner where it's like, oh, we're going to do all these things and we're going to like reduce the deficit. And it's like, look, the math doesn't math, and it's in the past, tax cuts never pay for themselves in the pure like money, money out to money in into the government. So what ultimately ends up happening is you have this group of I'll call it more far right fiscal hawks, and who are just like, look, I won't vote for anything that adds to the deficit. Like you can't do these things. Like even with all the shenanigans that they're playing with, like the scoring and does the tax cut even like cost anything and things like that. It's still no one's getting to any kind of number that says this will actually reduce the deficit because it's just no one's having, and this is not a Republican problem, but like no one's having a serious conversation, right? It's like, there are two sides of the ledger. There's revenue in and there's money out. And, as with a business or any other kind of organization, right? Like you have to be looking at both of those pieces, and both parties for different reasons and different angles don't. So, if you're taking the sort of I'll call it the generic Democrat, or how it's sort of painted, right? Oh, just tax, and then spend. Sure, but then for Republicans, then it would be like, well, cut all the taxes, but leave most of the spending, and there's a donut hole.
But that's been a real problem, I think, for Republicans since Trump 1.0, right? I mean, President Trump spends a lot of money. He spent a lot of money in the first term, spending a lot of money in the second term. And that balance, which has traditionally been Republican, kind of core talking points, is reduce taxes and reduce spending. And that's just missing right now. That's not part of the lexicon.
Yeah, and then I mean the other thing that it just kind of somewhat boggles my mind is if you are, I'll call it, taking the Trump view of things, and NATO was just a black hole of money for the United States. They need to step up and spend more money so that the U.S. doesn't have to spend it. And then now the EU, a lot of countries have started stepping up their spending, but like, it only saves money if you then spend less money on defense, but we're now spending more, at least based on this bill, or on what the budget that Trump wants. So again, the math just doesn't math.
I don't know either. We could talk about this maybe next month. I do want to wade into that, into defense spending. I think that's an important point you just made, Stefan. But are they not spending more money on defense, or are they trying to be more efficient in the way that the military operates? Like, for example, less money on fighter jets, but because war is different now, especially as we've seen in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Heavy reliance on drones. So all nation states right now are thinking, hey, you know what? I could save money with drones, particularly with ballistic drones or air combat drones, instead of spending a whole lot of money on multi-million-dollar or multi-billion contracts on fighter jets. You understand what I'm saying? So there's a point to that. In a way, I actually don't disagree with the administration too much here, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a recalibration based on differing realities, and defense is a funny thing because it is of course very tied to congressional, legislative, sacred cows, right? There's a lot of money sloshing around in that space. So, are we really deploying our assets effectively, or are we deploying them to protect legislative seats? And those are two different arguments. I think the overall conversation is absolutely well due. It's a different landscape now, and how do we achieve warfare and strategic objectives without you going down the massive expenditure space that really is can be as big as whatever room you allowed it to fill. It's a good conversation to have. And in terms of Europe, I mean, I don't know as the discussion was always was necessarily one of we're going to spend less. It was a question of, if we're going to be relied on as your backstop, then you need to be an effective partner. And I think that was a reasonable thing to argue, and certainly the Europeans seem to have thought so. They're stepping up their spending, and let's face it, there's a human component there. I mean, Europe has long scorned the U.S. for our dearth of social policies, which they champion. And yet the argument can be made quite realistically that the luxury of creating those policies was due to insufficient funding of their commitments militarily. And that's fine until the wolf comes knocking at your door. And the wolf is knocking, and they recognize the value of it. And there's no degree of U.S. Whining and complaining about lack of fulfilling those expenditure obligations until there was a wolf. Now there is, and I think the administration chose their opportunity to make that an effective argument to balance this with our allies quite well. I think it was a good move.
Yeah, I mean, the only exception there, of course, and Stefan, you can weigh in on this, is Canada. Canada is increasing
Well.
Canada is increasing its military budget, and it's going about 3-4%, or committing about 3-4% of GDP to its military. But I mean, Canada is not Europe. What does Canada have to worry about right now? It's worried about becoming the 51st state to the United States, or according to the Trump administration. Like, so suddenly, because it's getting this threatening kind of language from the administration, now suddenly they're increasing their military budget. So that's not a good look, Stefan.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we saw this with the new prime minister. Carney came into town, and Trump wouldn't even let it go during the meeting. And then when the prime minister was like, "It's not going to happen," then I think the president's answer was, "Never say never," or something to that effect, right? Which is, I mean, it's insane. It's embarrassing. It's also like, I mean, are you going to make it one state? Is it going to be, what do they? I think they have 13 provinces, or 13, territories and provinces. And then it's like, are each one of those? Because do they each get 2 senators? Because I don't know. Maybe this starts working out really well for Democrats in the U.S. Senate. But besides the ridiculousness of that, I mean, like, look, I find it embarrassing that the leader of our country is going around talking about taking over friends and neighbors in this fashion.
Yeah, talking about taking over friends and neighbors, and then suddenly one of the neighbors is increasing its defense budget in response to that. So that's another issue for another time. But we do want to continue heading into geopolitics, and so what do you both make out of the president's recent trip to the Middle East? Right. So normally these trips are about diplomacy, but this one was all about cutting business deals, showering gifts, and gestures of grandeur, right? So we had this one big gift from Qatar, the 400 was like a half, what was it? Like a $500 million or nearly $500 million Air Force One makeover plane that security experts are saying it would take years to outfit this with the security specifications that are needed for a jet of that magnitude. So we've got some people worried about that. What do you both make of it? Justin, I mean, is this the way that a president should operate, or maybe this president should be operating? We definitely should just expect that for this administration for years to come, or throughout the second term.
Let's talk about the Middle East first and foremost. There is, in the world of diplomacy, American diplomacy has kind of been driven by American ideals typically, and you can point to a litany of failures to say yes, well, including our ugly retreat from Afghanistan. But that has traditionally been something that has been core to our foreign diplomacy. Protecting America, protecting our allies, and a shared sense of ideals, which are freedom, has been democracy. Those two things have been the twin pillars of it, right? You don't hear about freedom nor of democracy in this tour. Now, that can be a challenge. I think that the administration would do well to speak to how America champions this and finds value in it. I think they are wise not to expect it of our Middle East neighbors. There is one democracy in the Middle East, and we are allied with it. That is, of course, Israel. All the other players in that space are complex. And successful foreign relations in the Middle East have been somewhat transactional. It's a respect for the Arab mindset and how they view the world very, very differently than the way Americans traditionally have. I think this could potentially be highly effective towards achieving some degree of greater peace and stability throughout the region. Keep in mind that Americans do not regard our Arab far-flung neighbors positively. Americans do not have a positive view of Saudi Arabia to the degree that they're aware of Qatar. They do not have a positive view of Qatar. These are things that if we're shown as being extraordinarily, administration is shown as being extraordinarily chummy, without having direct results that improve the balance, or excuse me, the stability within the region, it's not going to bode well in terms of the overall brand for the president. But I think it has real opportunity. We'll see how well it goes. I mean, we know that in his first administration, he was extraordinarily close to achieving a deal with Saudi Arabia. With Saudi Arabia was establishing relations with Israel. That would be momentous. We know that has been a chief goal of the adversaries of the United States to derail that. We've seen papers that were identified just over the weekend by the Israeli military that underlines that this was a core goal to the Hamas attack on Israel. If the United States can achieve practical, pragmatic relationships with key players in the Middle East that turn the balance of power against those that are diametrically opposed to the United States, key among them Iran, and from all things flow from Iran, our enemies, this is a potentially good thing. Let's speak about the airplane. A U.S. president should be careful about gifts from foreign governments that could be misperceived. I think that's a reasonable thing to argue. I also think it's an impractical gift. It could not be Air Force One. It could not be during his term. I think the president is deeply frustrated by Boeing and the degree to which he thinks this is a practical approach. I don't know. I mean, reality will set in once the how that process would have to be to even take that thing. So I think realistically, it's a non-starter. It's not going to happen. It has some issues optically, without question. I think so. But I think for practical purposes, it's never going to happen. So it's not going to be an issue.
Some optical issues, and the president also, trying to use this as something maybe to pressure Boeing, right? And but at the same time, I mean, what are you going to put one cost overrun over another? Because trying to modify that gift, right? That plane, you're going to add the price of that plane or modifying the price of that plane to the cost overrun that Boeing is doing right now in terms of creating a brand new Air Force One. I want to get your thoughts, Stephanie, on, I mean, is this a good, healthy thing, getting into much more transactional business deal like relationships, particularly with countries out in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with almost everything that Justin said about the Middle East and the importance of diplomacy and what it means in the end. I did not see any of that on this trip. This was like the Griff tour from what I'm seeing, right? Like, this was like, how can the Trump family line their pockets even more once they're out of office with this trip? And I mean, it was borderline insane. I mean, the plane is ridiculous, to all the points Justin made, and it's impractical, it's ridiculous, and the fact that they're like, oh no, they're donating it to the Department of Defense, and then they're going to give it to the Trump Library, which doesn't even exist. There's not even an organization to build a library, gets the plane. I mean, it's just like, what the actual F? Like, I mean, this is not how any of this is supposed to work. And like, I mean, it just feels like every like positive thing you could point to just feels like on the back end there was like a handshake over like, oh, I'll do this, and then when I'm out of office, like, Eric or Don Jr. gets like X, Y, and Z, and it's all going back to money. I mean, it's like watching a weird version of The Sopranos, and instead of the garbage company, it's like the U.S. government is the legitimate business, while everything else is going on the side.
To visit. Meanwhile, the administration seems to be being quite firm about this red line of dealing with Iran, which is enrichment. And will the U.S. actually stand by that red line, which is Israel's goal? We'll see.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, Justin. I mean, is there a way though that Israel could micro-target Hamas without killing so many Gazan civilians? I mean, so
No.
You know, I
So
mean,
just
it's not just surrounded by a sea of enemies. Well, it is surrounded by a sea of geopolitical
Yeah.
enemies that are out for its destruction. But I know so many Palestinian civilians have been killed. I mean, just 50,000 last count. I mean, it's just disproportionate in terms of the military response here. I read one story where a pregnant woman was like got killed in a direct missile hit from Israel. I don't know. It's just it just yes, Hamas is a threat. Yes, that's a serious security concern to Israel. But is there a different way to do this?
Yeah, yeah, there is. So if you buy the proportionate argument, you could go in, find several thousand of their people to kill, and walk away and wait for the next time a bunch of murderous thugs run across your border and burn your babies alive and rape your women and murder them, and it'll happen over and over again. The unfortunate reality about war is that it disproportionately targets civilians. That's you and I. We all know that war does not kill a higher proportion of those who are armed, whether they're regular army or guerrillas or whatever you want to call them. They are actually in the line of combat, but they are the small proportion of those who are killed in wars. Wars are just horrifying in any way, shape, or form. But the way to avoid war is not to attack your neighbor and put them in a position where they feel that they have to destroy you in order to ensure their own existence moving forward. And that's the position that Israel sees itself in right now. And they are surrounded by hostile neighbors, not one of which really is an ally, right? Not one of which is terribly friendly. There are overtures to this. I mean, the Syrian change of leadership certainly is something that could really have positive impacts throughout it. But I think it's important for us all over here in our bastion of security across the ocean to recognize that Israel has a very real existential threat. They've talked about this a lot, and I think it starts to kind of fall upon maybe not deaf ears, but ears that are a little more inured to it. I know that's not what you're saying, but unfortunately, how do you achieve an end? Right. And in the wars that America has persecuted with success, that end has been achieved through total victory. And in the wars that America has persecuted with less success, that end has been achieved with peace treaties. And we're seeing this in the peace treaty situations that are, what's the other one, right? Ukraine and Russia. Peace treaties work when both sides are so bloodied and so miserable that both of them are willing to accept terms that they otherwise would not accept. That's what peace treaties are, right? Everyone walks away equally unhappy. It's kind of like a legal argument, but more so. That's the challenge in Ukraine right now. Is what does Ukraine? Up until this point, Ukraine wasn't willing to budge. They wanted Crimea, and they weren't willing to negotiate. Now they are, but Putin is not willing to negotiate because he's making slow but steady progress. Are you going to achieve a lasting peace deal? Or are you going to be back at the table with another war soon? I mean, it's hard to see how a peace deal is going to last in Ukraine. These things are they're just ugly in every way, shape, or form. And the only clean way, although it involves massive destruction and massive human suffering, is total victory.
And I think
Stefan, go ahead.
On these two conflicts, right? I think the big difference, I would argue, is in one of them, you have, you could have lasting peace because both entities are not looking for expansion and, moving forward, expanding their borders, right? Like Ukraine, at least from everything we can tell here, they don't seem to have an interest. They're not trying to take over parts of Russia and become a bigger Ukraine. They just want their country back the way it used to be. And if Russia would just say, okay, you know what, we're out. This was dumb. We're done attacking. I think it would be over, right? Israel is a different situation, and what you have are, and this is where all the civilians, both Israeli and Palestinian, are just caught in the crosshairs of Hamas, who has lasting peace is not really an interest of Hamas, right? War is good for them. Conflict with Israel is good for them, and they don't seem to overly care about their people all that much, right? Like lots of people dying doesn't affect us as long as sort of the main leadership is still intact. Israel right now, you have a incredibly far right government, and the only thing that's holding that together is Netanyahu sort of doing what the far right wants in this situation. And Netanyahu knows that if he doesn't, they leave the government, there are elections, Netanyahu won't get elected, and then he's going to court and likely to jail for lots of different charges and things like that. So the motivation for Netanyahu is staying out of jail, which means staying in power. Hamas is just like, hey, as long as we can still like sort of claim we're in charge. So there's not like you could see one side being like, hey, you just do this one thing and we're never gonna throw a rock across that fence ever again. So that's Israel's just a totally different in my view, just a different situation, always has been. Whereas like Ukraine is, I'm putting it just totally on one side of this could be solved tomorrow if Russia decided they wanted to end this.
I wanted to move on to and I did want to move on to coming back domestically to issues back in Washington while we still have time. SCOTUS, Supreme Court. So the administration wants to reconfigure the 14th Amendment to ensure that birthright citizenship, they want a birthright citizenship ban, so it won't be applied to American-born offspring of undocumented or illegal migrants. So SCOTUS is hinting at the potential of a ruling in, I think, early to mid-June. And how does this play out, you all think? Is this really just about migrants? And there's some questions about that. Some real problems here. As the Trump administration lawyers, the Solicitor General was arguing his case in front of Supreme Court justice, even conservative Supreme Court justices like Amy Coney Barrett and also Neil Gorsuch had a lot of really difficult questions for the Trump administration's lawyer. Justin?
I think this is a stinker. Personally, this is not something that Americans value and want and desire. I to be perfectly frank, I don't see the end game on this. It does not seem to be something that aligns with reading of the 14th Amendment, whether it's the layperson like me or sophisticated legal scholars or the Supreme Court. I mean, it seems like it's destined to fail. I don't really understand the value of it. I think the administration has largely accomplished its goals at the border, and these are the things that make me scratch my head about the administration of what the purpose is. It seems out of step with what the voting public want. It seems out of step legally. So I don't understand the impetus for this.
Yeah. It gets to the question of like who really is allowed to become an American, right? Like, one, you start with the offspring of undocumented illegal migrants, but who else suddenly? I mean, I've seen legal scholars get worried about, okay, if this goes on, if this is allowed, then who else is deemed not an American, right? Illegal migrant aside. I mean, this was born out of post-Civil War and offering citizenship to Black slaves. And even the president himself acknowledged this, like, hey, this was supposed to resolve slavery. And some people are really concerned about, okay, suddenly you mess around with it. Do we suddenly go back to that kind of time? I don't know. There are all sorts of very sordid legal arguments that are being thrown about. Go ahead, Stephan.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is, so the case in front of the Supreme Court, actually, they weren't ruling on the birthright citizenship. They were ruling on, the question is, can a judge in one area of the country put an injunction or a stop across the country? And I'm not like a SCOTUS scholar or even like a legal, junkie, but this one was like, it was like, this was fascinating because, usually it's like, okay, like, these two judges are definitely going to do this. These three are going to do this. The interesting thing is like what happens with the ones who sometimes can go in either direction. But this was like, I mean, almost every every sitting justice had like arguments on both sides, right? Because it's this super. So on the the one side, it's like, hey, you're giving a lot of power to one judge, right? But then they had all these questions that I thought were again just like really interesting, and in my opinion, the Solicitor General didn't really have many good answers on like, so what happens if a family who lives in New Jersey goes to Pennsylvania and has their baby? Like, now, and Pennsylvania has one rule, but New Jersey has another. Like, what is that baby? What's the status of that baby? Whose responsibility is it to figure out if you are a citizen or if you're not a citizen? But then, one of the bigger questions, it's like, look, it's because, and I think the conservative justices know this, that like if they come back and are like, no, one judge can't stop nationwide, right? Then what happens if a Democratic president comes in and writes an executive order that says, I don't believe the Second Amendment applies to people owning guns? Like, that's my interpretation. I mean, this is basically what the administration is doing with the 14th Amendment. They're like, oh no, we just have a different take of what the actual words in the Constitution are. So we're going to do this executive order. So let's say a Democratic president does that, then then only people in places where someone brings a lawsuit can have guns, and it's got to go through this entire process. When you're looking at something that is just plainly in the Constitution. Now, with guns, there's people have different views of how sort of broad that right is, but I think it's tough to argue that there's not some level of the ability to have a gun. Just like in the 14th Amendment, I don't see how you read that in any other way, and it never has been, and that's why they're losing in every single court of like, look, you're born here, you're an American citizen, period, end of story. If they wanted to be only about slaves, that word existed, they would have said slaves born in this country to slave parents but they didn't. They said persons, right? So, and even Antonin Scalia, who's not exactly a liberal, was like, it's people. Like, it's anyone who's born here. There's no other way to read that.
Yeah, lots of interesting. Yeah, it's very, very fascinating when you have conservative judges weighing in on this and very much disagreeing with the administration. Well, at least openly, well, throwing quite a bit of sharp questions at the Solicitor General. And so it'll be interesting to see how this ruling turns out. Okay, turning to Democrats who still can't seem to get their act together. Midterms are just less than a couple of years away, and so there's obviously those intergenerational issues with millennials and Gen Z wanting the older folks to step aside, and some Gen Xers are joining in that crowd too. But there's a big conversation over what approach, what model should Democrats adopt. So should it be California Governor Gavin Newsom, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, or the Illinois J.B. Pritzker model? I'd go ahead and add arguably the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, or don't forget about Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. So what's the best issue here? So I'm going to go to you first, Justin, on this, from someone on the other side here looking in and saying, maybe giving some critique of where should Democrats go first? What's the best model for them?
I appreciate that. I am the least qualified to speak to this. So I'm very much looking forward
curious to get your thoughts.
I need to.
I'm very much looking forward to what Stefan has to say and subsequently agreeing with it. So I will say this, that what Democrats need to be aware of is this it's two sides of the same page. One is saying I'm good because they suck. That's not an argument for winning. That will fail. It'll fail every single time. It fails in recalls. It fails in the presidential election. Ultimately, that ended up kind of being a fairly reasonable proxy with what Kamala Harris's argument to win the presidency was. And you need to, by that same token, you need to argue that successfully that you are going to make Americans' lives better. So those are the two things that matter to American voters, and Democrats just simply need to heed that and listen and chart a path towards those things that are the closest things that align with the broad Democratic platform and coalition. It's a lot easier said than done. But what we're seeing right now, I think, at least in the public eye, is this kind of three different approaches. Pritzker kind of being the let's protest, let's be angry, let's yell. I don't think that's terribly effective unless you have it'll get people out, it'll get your base out, but it's not terribly effective in terms of winning elections overall. The Newsom approach, well, gosh, I mean, choose which month it is for Newsom and his approach. And Whitmer, I don't know. I mean, they need to work on this overall messaging, and it can't be that I'm just a better person or a better party than that person or that party. They'll get there. It's not like Democrats haven't figured out this messaging stuff before, but whether they'll get there in time for the midterms, I'm not sure.
Okay, now go ahead, Stefan. What's your?
So the way I like, here's the big thing. Like, anyone on the Democratic side who says, I know the answer or I know the path forward, the correct path forward, is full of shit, because no one knows what the right thing to do is, right? Like, it's everything is changing too quickly. Like, I couldn't even tell you the correct messaging 3 months from now, let alone a year from now, let alone, next September of 2026 or even, 2028, right? So we don't know. So right now, I think having different people out there trying different things, doing different things, as long as they're living under a broader umbrella of like, hey, we're all on this side of the table working against that side of the table. And, to Justin's point, like if your entire argument is he sucks, we're better, like he sucks, then it's not really a winning argument. But, we're going to have to sort of try to figure this out. So, the way my oldest daughter loves Kaya's cheese, and that was not a lot of people in her third grade class did not like Kaya's cheese. And her teacher said, no one should yuck on someone else's yum. So, the one thing Democrats need to do is not yuck on anyone else's yum. So, like, look, Pritzker's approach could be the right approach. Like, Whitmer's approach could be the right approach. Shapiro, hasn't seemed like be out there like as much really pushing things and stuff like that. But like, who knows? I feel like Newsom's approach is like probably.
I just had to throw my home state in it.
I mean, Newsom is doing the equivalent of the dumbass Democratic consultant telling the candidate to get on a motorcycle so that the men under 30 will vote for him. I mean, it's like, yeah, so he's like, I don't even know what he's doing or what he's going for, but it's like a half-hearted attempt at like trying to be, I don't know, more conservative, moderate or something. I don't know. It's like someone showed him a poll where it was like, oh, like, men, younger men who voted for Trump, like, don't like homeless people. And he's like, hey, like, let's make it illegal to be homeless. And, I don't know who's advising him. Terrible decision. But other than him, like, you just gotta, like, in general, it's like, look, just, people have to be fighting the fight, and it's not like, oh, we don't have to coalesce and shouldn't coalesce under one like banner right now, or one message right now, or one approach, because like we don't really know where the American people are going to be. So let's just try a lot of things. Let's throw some spaghetti at the walls. Let's not fight against each other. AOC and Bernie need to be out there doing their thing. Shapiro can be out there doing his thing. All this kind of stuff. Let them all do it. Let's all remember we're on the same side. And ultimately, the goal is to get as many people to think that they suck and we're good. Just don't say it.
Hey, Stefan, you think Kamala Harris should run again in 2028?
No,
I mean,
I'll say I'm not in the business of telling people what to do, but like, it doesn't. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, I wouldn't. But she, like any candidate, right? Like, you have to like really want it, and you have to come up with a good rationale for why, right? Like she lost the popular vote, obviously lost the electoral college. There's plenty of blame for Biden, and she only had 100 days and things like that. But I don't. As of right now, I don't see like a compelling narrative of like, oh, it should be her. But if like it's in her belly and she's like, I really want to do this and I want to throw my hat in the ring in the primary, like, go for it. Like, put yourself in front of the voters, tell them why you should be there, and see what happens.
Yeah. Pete Buttigieg.
Sure. But again, like, you know, I'm not really ruling anyone out. I mean, like, look, Buttigieg is, you know, he's very good at, you know, walking into more unfriendly territory, coming across as a very level-headed, intelligent human. He's got lots of lots of facts, lots of information, right? Like, he can make really good, solid arguments. You know, I mean, like, seems like a nice guy. Like, yeah, go for it. Like, Shapiro should be, everyone should, or not everyone, but, you know, lots of people should be considering it, as long as they're not over, you know, 70. And that's it. That's my line. Like, under 70, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Justin, as far as potential Republican candidates, right now the Republican approach is all things Trump. But I mean, what are those? You know, Trump. You know, basically, because there was some worry there that, you know, there's not going to be a 2020 election because there's going to be some tinkering with the 22nd Amendment, and so he'll get a third term. But you know, he's hinting at like, hey, I want my airplane gift to be in my library. You know, he's like, I don't want to keep doing this after a second term. So, I mean, but who's going to be next? Is it going to be JD Vance? I mean, what are some names that are floating about? And, you know, who would take the Trump mantle?
So that's the interesting thing, because you can't really float your name and explore it without incurring the wrath of Donald Trump, right? If you start
Right.
talking about that now, then you're making a big mistake, and I think people are aware of that. I mean, clearly JD Vance is well positioned for it, but I think everyone else is being very careful about how they speaking about it at all.
Yeah. Some names that you hear: JD Vance, of course, he's well positioned, natural nominee pick for 2020. Even conversations about Trump's son, Eric Trump. I mean, I've heard about that. I've seen that. So I don't know, you know, maybe like this bid to continue the Trump legacy, you know, through maybe having Eric Trump run. But that's a big, interesting question. And right now, nobody's going to want to talk about it. So we'll talk about it, because we always talk about what happens next, right? That's it for this month's episode or segment of What Happens Next. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. More on Stephen Hankett's work at either lpstrategies.com or trinancy.com. And you can find Justin Wallen at jwallen.com. So I'm Charles Ellison, your host. More about me at thebnote.com. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks all.
Well, thanks, guys. That was fun.